Good afternoon. My name is Sari Hanafi. I am the director of the Center for Arab and Middle Eastern Studies. On behalf of this center and the Brazilian Cultural Center, I'm so honored today to have this collaboration and to have this panel discussion about Marxian critique of the Jewish question and the debate on antisemitism. I would like to welcome you all, but particularly I will welcome Philippe Gallard. He representing the ambassador of Brazil here in Lebanon. But also I would like to welcome Paulo Romero, who is head of the cultural and press section in the embassy. Before presenting our dear speaker, I would like to say that this talk is not only timely because of, the debate on anti-Semitism, but also we are so glad to have the position of Brazilian president concerning the Israeli genocide on Gaza, President Lula. And we have a long-standing relationship, I would say, between Lebanon and Brazil. Not only, I'm not thinking only about Lebanese diaspora in Brazil, but also, a lot of intellectual relationship happened in the past, particularly half century. I'm thinking about the book of Elizabeth Picard, where she highlighted amazing intellectual emerged in Latin America from this region. When I was in São Paulo, Arlene, I was walking in this in the market, and suddenly I found the name of Ricardo Jaffet. So I spot this name because thanks to the family Jaffet, we have amazing library here at UB. It's called Jaffet Library. So just to say that how warmly would like to welcome you. So Arlene Elizabeth Clemesha is a Brazilian historian and professor of contemporary Arab history at the University of São Paulo. She specialized in Palestine, Arab-Jewish relations, Marxism, and memory studies. She also translated Edward Said into Portuguese and published widely in multiple languages. She also served on the UN International Coordinating Network on Palestine from 2005 to 2015. Currently, she directs the Center for Arab Studies, Palestine Studies, at the University of São Paulo, and contributes to debates on Middle Eastern politics and culture. So please join me in welcoming Professor Clemesha. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor Sari. Is this on? There. Okay. Well, yes, it's really a great pleasure, also an honor to be here. I thank you very much for such a warm welcome and remembering that, we do have long and good ties from Brazil to Lebanon and both ways. So it's really good to think about that from that perspective while being here. So I'd really like to thank the university, the Arab University, the American University of Beirut, Professor Sari Hanafi, the director of the Center for Arab and Middle East Studies, others who welcomed me here, Karim Makdisi and Alia Saidi, So thank you all, and thank you all students for being here. It's really lovely to have an audience with all these students, which is what motivates us most in our work. And I'd like to thank the Brazilian ambassador, the ambassador of Brazil to Lebanon, Ambassador Tarcísio Costa, for all his initiative and efforts, and of the whole embassy and the team putting up a chair of Brazilian studies in Lebanon. So that's what we're doing here. We're inaugurating this chair of Brazilian studies in Lebanon. So thank you to Pablo Romero, who's the head of the cultural office and been taking good care of me, and that I do work a lot. So a full agenda thanks to Pablo, which makes me very happy. And thank you to also the Minister, Councillor Filippi. Great to be here. Yes, I would like to say that this book that I have recently republished is the second edition, called Marxism and Judaism, History of a Difficult Relation. It was actually my master's. So I wrote this book 28 years ago. And this is the second edition, came out just now. For 28 years, and during all this period, I didn't really want to go back to the subject. The book was out of press, and the editor would say, no, let's reprint. And I was always busy. I was working with the question of Palestine, Palestinian history. So I went from Jewish studies through the perspective of Marxism, viewing both how Marxism and different Marxist currents viewed the issue of Jewish emancipation, and also the point of view of the other, let's say, side, the Jews inside Marxism. So there's this whole collaboration and involvement, which is a dialogue, really, of the Jewish question viewed by Marxism and Marxist currents, and Jews inside Marxist currents and how they interacted and what came out of this and so forth. Now, as I said, for 2 decades, I really didn't want to go back to the subject, and then before the genocide started, I decided that, for academic reasons, I did want to, and it was actually quite timely, because I think the whole discussion has a lot to say about what is happening today. I think it can bring certain clarifications. There's a certain angle that can help bring clarifications about the disputes that are happening today, the disputes, the narratives, and so forth. Well, the topic of this session, then, this conversation, which we begin now, is the Marxian or the Marxist critique of the Jewish question and anti-Semitism, the debate on anti-Semitism. Now, what do we mean when we say the Jewish question? This very Jewish question. It's a very complicated term. What we want to understand here as the Jewish question is actually the issue of emancipation on one side, and anti-Semitism, right? So we could substitute this term, this vague term, Jewish question, for anti-Semitism, depending on the historical period we're talking about, and of course, the answers to anti-Semitism, the modes and the ideas for Jewish emancipation in Europe. This is the focus, okay? Now, as you all know, Marx wrote an essay, and only one essay in his whole life dedicated to the Jewish question, although he went back to the subject in The Sacred Family, but it was like a continuation of that discussion. And this essay was called On the Jewish Question. And it was a very controversial essay. After the Second World War and after the Holocaust, he was accused of being anti-Semitic, not only of being anti-Semitic, but of actually calling for the elimination of the Jews of Europe. Now, he was actually accused of being, let's say, a forerunner for Hitler or something like that, because of what he said. And I don't want to spend so much time on Marx because I want to bring the discussion forward, but I will really have to go into a few of these subjects that were treated in his essay if we want to understand the discussion, where I want to take the discussion today. What Marx wrote, he wrote his essay in 1843. It was published in 1844. It was composed of 2 essays that were put together. The first part is not so polemic. The first essay is a discussion on against Bruno Bauer, who was a colleague of his inside the group of the young Hegelians. And Bruno Bauer was a theologian. He analyzed Judaism from the point of view of religion. He actually formulated that the Jewish religion was less developed than the Christian religion. So he had this idea that Judaism, the Christian religion, was more advanced. But his main idea was that the Jews would have to let go of their Judaism if they wanted to be emancipated. Now, Marx begins his essay saying, what do Jews in Europe want today? What are they demanding? What are they struggling? He was writing in 1842, right? They're struggling for liberal rights, for political rights. They're struggling for equal rights where they live, in Prussia, where he was writing. And then in this discussion with Bruno Bauer was saying, well, if Jews want to be emancipated, they have to let go of their religion, and the Christian state has to let go of its state religion, Christian religion, for emancipation to happen, right? So you have to have a situation in which the Jews are capable of being emancipated and the state is capable of emancipating the Jews. Otherwise, it won't be possible and so forth. And Marx answered him saying, listen, you're wrong, no? In the name of political emancipation, the emancipation brought about by a political modern liberal state, you cannot demand that the Jews abandon their religion. Now, of course, this is a bit surprising maybe for some of the young students who have this idea that Marxism is against religion, and here Marx is against religion, but here Marx is defending that the Jews should not be required to abandon their religion to be able to be emancipated in the political state. Because the problem, said Marx, is the mode of emancipation that Bruno Bauer is formulating. Bruno Bauer imagines political emancipation as the final liberation of man, and it's not. Political emancipation is actually limited. It's good, it's an advance, it's important, equal rights are important, but equal rights will not bring about, for example, the end of antisemitism. So Marx does not put it in those words, but that is what he's formulating. Now this was half a century after the French Revolution, and it was already possible to see in France that, in fact, equal rights for the Jews, although they were promoting assimilation into society, they were not exactly bringing about the end of anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism could still be seen in Central Europe, of course. I mean, the Jews were very clearly oppressed. Even in Western Europe, where emancipation had gone further, equal rights and so forth. So, but Marx says the problem with Bauer is that he takes religion to be the final essence of the Jews. No? And what we want really is not a critique of religion to understand the Jewish question and to understand the oppression and persecution of the Jews. What we really need is a critique of the Jews in their real life, a social critique and an economic critique of the Jews in their real daily life. Only through a real analysis of the Jews in their social and economic life can we be able to understand the issue of emancipation and why political emancipation is limited, although desirable. He would say that political emancipation had the same from religion had the same nature as political emancipation from private property, for example. So the state was the mediator between the man, the person, and the ideal arena, the state arena, in which equality was supposedly existed. Equal vote, right? If you have equal votes, you have this idea, this illusion of equality among people. Of course, equal votes only for men, never for women so far. Exactly because equality was not real. It was an ideal emancipation, a political emancipation, right? So the differences were preserved, and to understand what real emancipation could look like, we go into the second part of his essay. The second part of his essay was the problematic part after the Second World War and after the Holocaust, right? Because Marx used some terms and some wording that did not age well at all. To answer Bruno Bauer, still in this dialogue and in this polemic with Bruno Bauer, he said, okay, Bauer is defending that the Jews should emancipate themselves from Judaism. Okay, now at the time in which Marx was writing, and Bauer and so on, and his other colleagues in the young Hegelians were Moses Hess, for example, who was one of the fathers of Zionism later on, It was very common for these intellectuals to use Judaism as a synonymous of commerce, of a merchant, of commerce, okay? And I will come back to this later, okay? Of course, you cannot say that all Jews were merchants or money lenders or whatever. This is quite clear. But there was this tendency. And this came from somewhere. It came from idea that society had in the Middle Ages as Jews as the main money lenders of the time, no? In a society where, for example, the church prohibited people from lending money with interest. No, the Jews could. So they had this possibility, and then this stigma kept stuck to them. So Marx, to answer Bauer, he said, no, that's not the case. The Jews don't have to emancipate themselves from Judaism. Society has to emancipate itself from money. He still hadn't developed the idea of capitalism, the critique of capitalism. Capitalism, the word, doesn't even come into this essay. It was still young Marx we're talking about. But he already had the idea that there were different forms of alienation. So there was the alienation of man through religion, and this critique was quite developed among his group. There was the alienation of man through the political state, which he developed in the first part of the essay, and the alienation of man through money. And he even used the term, the money, the God money. So this is what the society has to get rid of. It's the God money. Now, he used this analogy that was common to answer Bauer with his own terms. So since Bauer was saying the Jews have to emancipate themselves from Judaism, Marx said, no, the Jews don't have to emancipate themselves from the religion. Society has to emancipate itself from Judaism. That was the sentence that got Marx into trouble 100 years later, right? He did not mean anything of, and he was accused of anti-Semitic later on. Now keep this, please, because this will be relevant in the 1970s, okay? We'll come back to it. Now, I have an article published in another part of this book on this debate, and it's quite clear from the argument Marx is making that he is defending that the Jews should be allowed to be Jews if they want to be Jews inside society of today. No one. So it doesn't really make sense to accuse him of wanting to eliminate the Jews. Okay. Now, so this was the debate that he never went back to, but this was very important. And just a parenthesis here, it was very important in his development of historical materialism, because he inverted the understanding, the idealism of the young Hegelians. He inverted the whole equation, right, to build the foundations of historical materialism, his method that he developed until the end of his life when analyzing the Capital, right? Das Kapital. So it was this essay actually that laid the grounds for the development of the main methodological tool of Marxism, right? Now, Marx wrote this very short essay. He didn't apply historical materialism to the history of the Jews. He never went into it. Only 100 years later did Abraham Leon, this young Marxist, do this. For 100 years, no Marxist was actually used the Marxist method to analyze Jewish history. So Abraham Leon, who was he? Abraham Leon was young Polish, left-wing Zionist to begin with, at the beginning. His family emigrated from Poland to Palestine, because it was pre-48, from Poland to Palestine. They didn't adapt, and they went to France and Belgium. And Abraham Leon, who began his intellectual life and militant life as a left-wing Zionist, he understood that he couldn't fit into that place and to that idea. And when he wrote his historical, let's see the name, this book was translated into Portuguese in 1947, very shortly after it was published for the first time in 1946 in France. Well, the book is called A Materialist Conception of the Jewish Question. Sometimes it has different translations of the title. And while writing a history of the Jews from ancient times until the Second World War, he deconstructs the idea of Zionism. So his whole book is a deconstruction of the main arguments of Zionism. So you can imagine that the left-wing Zionists hate him. They absolutely understand that, they really, but okay, the second thing I want to say about Abraham Leon is that he wrote this book under Nazi occupation of Belgium in very difficult conditions. The book might be schematic in sometimes and doesn't go in depth into other periods, but he develops a very valuable instrument, insight, etc., into the Jewish history. And he was killed shortly after. Now, in 1940, I think it was 42 actually, I don't really recall, or 43. He was hiding, he wrote this in hiding in Belgium, and then at a certain moment he decided that, okay, it was safe to go out of hiding, and he was caught by the Nazis and taken to Auschwitz, where he was killed, okay? So he wrote the book at the age of like 24, 25, and was killed right after. And in this book, he develops a theory of the people class. He says, okay, the Jews in Europe, 19th to 20th century, are not exactly a nation, a people, and they're not exactly a class, a caste or something. They are a people class. So he explains the preservation of certain national characteristics, languages, religion, and so forth, according or explained through the Jews in their social and economic role in societies in pre-capitalist Europe. So while there was no capitalism, the Jews had this function. And in fact, there was a tendency, although it's not possible, and also Abraham Leon doesn't say that it was completely like this, but there was a tendency for specialization of Jews in commerce and money lending and so on. They did not belong to the mode of production, the feudal mode of production. They lived, to use another famous sentence, in the pores of the feudal society, right? So he was trying to explain exactly why societies in Europe, different ages, developed anti-Semitism, considering Jews, foreigners, strangers, etc. And then came the period in which they were considered also, a whole bunch of stigmas were imputed against them. But the main aspect of this theory is that it was important to understand that this role of the Jews, in which Abraham Leon characterized as the people class, it only existed during pre-capitalism. The rise of capitalism meant that the Jews were expelled from the societies because these societies, when they started developing their pre-capitalist and capitalism modes of production, it wasn't interesting anymore for the Jews to be present and to have this role, because these societies did not want the competition of the merchant Jew, of the moneylender Jew. So this role, this function ceased to exist, and this was when Jews really started to be expelled from Europe. So 13th century from Britain to Britain of today, right? France in 1340, there was a wave of expulsions. The unification of Spain and Portugal, the Inquisition, which came after, so 1492, 1496, that's when masses of Jews came to the Ottoman Empire. In fact, just a small note here, up to the 12th century, most Jews lived in Arab lands, up to the 12th century. After that, the concentration was in Europe. Well, now, so Abraham Leon was explaining, explaining anti-Semitism exactly using the method that Marx had developed, applying it to his own analysis. And then he explained how during the modern period, anti-Semitism, which in feudal times and pre-capitalist societies was mainly a question of religion and of religious stigmatization and hatred and so on, became a form of racism, no? And that's how we define anti-Semitism today. It's a racism against the Jews. It's a form of racism that has to do a lot with conspiracy theories and stigmatizations, and so it's really a form of racism against the Jews. And at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th, the Jews in Europe really got involved in massive movements for self-emancipation, especially in that Pale of Settlement, which was formed by Lithuania, Polonia, Ukraine, inside the Tsarist Empire. And the main group that they formed, that they built, was a movement called the Bund. It's the abbreviation in Yiddish. The Bund means the union, for the abbreviation for the Union of Social Democratic Jews of Lithuania, Poland, and Russia. And the Bund was anti-Zionist. And what is interesting here also, and it's something that I didn't realize when I was a young student doing this research, and which I realized now when I republished, simply because I had to stop and think about it and write a new foreword and so on, was that actually this whole story of Jewish forms of emancipation that were not Zionist, we don't learn and we don't know much about them because the narrative that, the movement and the narrative that won was Zionism, with the Holocaust and the birth of Israel. And Zionism was never interested in having this other Jewish history studied and discussed and learned. On the contrary, just as every good nationalism, it would portray itself as the culmination, the natural development and culmination of Jewish history. No? So Zionism presented itself as the whole reason, right, for Jewish history, hiding and not allowing, of course, for other views, to really be developed and studied and so on. So the Bund was the main Jewish movement and party at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. But then there were also many Jews involved in other movements, in the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks, and struggling for, together with the movement for revolution in Russia, because in fact this is one of the places where at the moment stigmatization and anti-Semitism was at its worst, and the Tsarist regime, the Tsars, they actually used the Jews as a scapegoat. They used the Jews as a political instrument of domination, of rule, especially in a time of crisis. So they promoted the pogroms, etc., etc. Now, still, and especially what we see in this debate is that these different groups, there were also the territorialists, and what did the Bund defend, actually? The Bund defended that Jews should be granted national cultural autonomy. Autonomia nacional cultural. So national cultural autonomy was the idea that since the Jews did not represent the majority of the population anywhere in this territory of the Pale of Settlement of the Tsarist Empire, they should be granted the right to take care of their own cultural affairs independent of whatever state formation there was, and without actually defending emancipation, political emancipation, and the formation of a nation there. Other groups defended different sorts also of emancipation, but the only group that really went for nationalism, understood as the building of a state outside of Europe and through colonialism, was Zionism. And Zionism at that time was really very small. It was a very minority, a very small group of the Jews in Europe in general, but especially where there were most Jews, which was Eastern Europe, right? Because Central Europe, there weren't many Jews, proportionally speaking, and Eastern Europe even less, although there were, of course, Jews among elites, among so on, but the masses, like 3 million, up to 5 million Jews were in Eastern Europe, in the Tsarist Empire, and in this Pale of Settlement, because in fact they weren't allowed to settle and live wherever they wanted to. So at this moment in which so much discussion was done and so many currents and intellectual and movements were discussing emancipation of people, the emancipation of workers, and the emancipation of the Jews, all this put together, different Marxist and important Marxist intellectuals of the time had their own views of the Jews and of the Jewish question. Most of them tended not to see the Jews as a nation. So if you take like Otto Bauer and Karl Kautsky, some of the main social democrats of Central Europe at the end of the 19th century, they didn't view the Jews as a nation. Okay, they had their own very specific formulations, but they viewed Zionism a bit as a movement that tried to reverse, in a very Marxist evolutionary conception, reverse the wheel of history, as if, okay, let's not go back to nationalism among Jews. The Jews are already assimilating, emancipating themselves in other ways. Why do we have to go back to nationalism? It was really an idea of reversing the wheel of history. Lenin, depending on the moment and the discussion he was articulating, sometimes he did describe the Jews as a very oppressed nation, but in other times not as a nation that should be developed through nationalism, right? And a bit later, 1930s, Leon Trotsky, because Lenin had already died, Otto Bauer, Karl Kautsky also, we're talking about a later period, Trotsky was actually one of the main Marxist leaders to view the Jews as a nation. And he said, well, if the Jews want to be a nation, they should be granted the right to be a nation. Zionism was quite developed at the time, 1930s. The problem is the way it's being done. No? So the whole critique of Jewish nationalism was not because of the idea that the Jews weren't a nation, because if they wanted to, they should be able to be granted the rights and the conditions to develop as a nation. But the problem was doing this through a colonialist project. No? So then that would be the development of the critique would take it in that direction. Now, the Second World War, of course, was a moment of interruption in these debates, a moment of disaster, a moment of elimination of Jews of Europe, elimination of left-wing movements of Europe. Anti-Semitism was used against the left and against the Jews, and anti-Marxism was used against the Jews, being accused of Marxism. It's a whole complex scenario where fascism was winning. That's just it, no? Until it was defeated in the Second World War. Then we saw, of course, the birth of Israel under the shock in Europe of the Holocaust. And all the arguments that were put into supporting Zionism and supporting, of course, no one was defending, unfortunately, the Europe should solve the Jewish question. No, they were defending that Palestine should solve the Jewish question, which had nothing to do with itself, right, with its own history and so forth. And in the 1970s was when a whole intellectual debate in France started to be created, be generated, mainly through intellectuals, even left-wing intellectuals such as Robert Mizrahi, a Jew, Zionist, who started to look back at Marx and accuse him of anti-Semitism. Now, 30 years ago, when I first published this book, I analyzed this whole accusation of anti-Semitism. But 30 years ago, I couldn't have imagined the debate on the new anti-Semitism because it wasn't there yet. No? But when I look back and went into the writings in the 1970s, what I could see is that the structures of the so-called new anti-Semitism were present in some of the formulations of the accusation of anti-Semitism against Marx himself. Now, what is the structure of this idea of the new anti-Semitism? Well, one of the main names in this is Robert Mizrahi. He wrote a whole book to criticize Marx, to say that he was anti-Semitic. And he criticizes Marx with in all aspects that you can imagine. Psychological aspects. He was a self-hating Jew. He didn't like his origins. He didn't get along with his mother, etc. Everything you can imagine. No? But at the end of the book, you realize that the whole discussion is pointing to one final argument. He would say that a true Marxist, no, because he was a left-wing French intellectual, he was actually a disciple of Sartre, no? He would say that the true Marxist had to defend the rights of the Jews in society, wherever they were, and the right of Israel as a Jewish state. What he did was actually something that was happening among other intellectuals also in the same period and place in France, not left-wing, but right-wing. It was the whole discussion around the right to difference, which the new right in France developed. No? So the right to difference was the idea that human rights, for example, or Marxism, they both had a fundamental problem. The problem of eliminating differences in society while granting rights to everyone. And on the contrary, what they defended was the right to difference. No, they did not see and then linking this right to difference to, in regard to the Jewish question, to the Jews, to the right of Israel as a Jewish state. Now listen, what does the IHRA definition say? Now what does it do? I don't know if everyone here is aware of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Maybe some of the students aren't. In Brazil, it's a big, huge discussion because this Zionist group does lots of lobbying into disseminating this new definition of anti-Semitism, right? The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, it was created in Europe. And one of the main drafters was Kenneth Stern, who actually today said he's not happy with the way the definition is being used. But the definition that he created, together with others, in 2016, the first paragraph is actually, okay, it defines in vague terms, doesn't help so much, but it defines in vague terms what anti-Semitism is, stigmatization and social hatred against the Jews for the simple fact of being Jews, etc. But then he calls it a working definition. So he, sets several examples of anti-Semitism. And out of 12 so-far examples, more than half are examples related to Israel. So the idea there is that what this is creating in this narrative is that criticism of Israel is a form of criticism of the Jew. But the whole operation is actually quite complex because what we see is that the whole operation really was built and it was cultivated and it was instrumentalized in a way that Jews really stuck with it, individuals around the world. So it created an affective relation between the individual Jew and the state of Israel. And and the basis is this right to difference, or the claim of the right to difference. So what it operated really was the idea that the Jew, individual Jew, anywhere in the world in society, he is part of a collective Jew, of a collective nation. And this collective Jew is represented by Israel, drawing a fictitious line, actually, between the collective Jew and the state, and the nation state, and the Jewish state. And whenever someone criticized Israel for its politics, this relation created through education, created through symbolism, created through Hasbara and etc. This link, was so strong, and the symbiosis between the individual Jew and the collective Jew and the state of Israel so strong that the state of Israel, which was created according to the Zionist narrative to defend the Jews around the world of anti-Semitism, which would never disappear in the idea behind Zionism. In fact, it inverted the equation. And the individual Jews around the world were actually defending Israel, and not Israel defending the individual Jews. Right? Israel is not capable of defending the individual Jews around the world. It's actually the opposite. So this new narrative, this new definition, this new understanding of anti-Semitism as anti-Zionism being a form of anti-Semitism, not the only one, but a form of anti-Semitism, actually inverted the whole relation, which was at the base of the founding of Zionism and of the State of Israel. So the Jews, feeling this connection, they would feel themselves, their right to be Jews, as being menaced whenever the state was criticized. Criticized for what? For being a Jewish state? Well, you might not like it, but no, that's not what it's criticized for. I mean, you might not like it not because it's Jewish, but because it's ethnic, right? Because it can be whatever, it can be any ethnic state, right? No. Criticized because of what it does to the Palestinians, because of Palestinian oppression, right? So what this definition does, actually, is to protect the state of Israel from criticism whenever and when it has been constantly oppressing and the Palestinians and eliminating and ethnic cleansing and et cetera, et cetera. So while the new anti-Semitism discourse, no, the other thing exactly that it creates is that it asserts, no, this whole operation, it asserts the right of Israel to be a Jewish state, as if this, you know, as if an ethnic democracy existed, as if a state could be an ethnic state and still be a democracy, also developing the idea of an ethnic apartheid, no, as justifiable, as legitimate. So while it defends its right to be a Jewish state, it is using this to defend its right to deny Palestinian identity inside the state. So it's the assertion of one identity and the right to identity being used to deny the identity and the existence of another group inside that state. Okay? So this new definition, the way in which it was built, the consequences which it has, is actually quite complex. It's not simply an idea, a straightforward idea, and especially it builds on feelings, it builds on emotions that are related to the old anti-Semitism, but articulated in a whole new way to protect the state of Israel from what it does to the Palestinians, right? So I want to stop right there, and I want to listen from you also.
Thank you so much for this amazing talk. So I didn't read a paper, but just I will react to what I heard a little bit, and then I will open the floor for discussion. But amazingly, I found it very interesting how you connect our understanding to neo-anti-Semitism to how some scholars in the past portrayed as anti-Semitic. I mean, particularly a posteriori, more than when they wrote their writing. For me, what is really new to understand, it's this kind of the importance suddenly of language, the decontextualized, depoliticized language, that it's a basis for taxing each other of anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, homophobic. It's more and more it become language game than it's we need to read a statement, a behavior in a context. And why I am saying this, in the last 4 or 5 days I was reading amazing book of Abdullah Öcalan, who is the head of the PKK. He wrote a 3-volume about his conception of what is democratic modernity, what is his conception of against this wild capitalism, etc. And so if you like, the way he writes the history, it's true there is a certain essentialization of Jews. For instance, it's exactly like Marx when connected to money and trader, etc. But if we read clearly Öcalan, how, for instance, sympathizer to Jewish questions about the Holocaust, I mean, we have no doubt that he is definitely not anti-Semitic. But nevertheless, you have, if you like, a petition of a scholar, Marxist, criticizing him of anti-Semitism. And this is more and more terrible things. Mm-hmm. I mean, I do remember in the 90s, I was the president of GOPS, General Union of Palestinian Students in France, and I do remember. After one talk, students, I mean, come and say you are anti-Semitic, and I didn't sleep for a week. I mean, but now it become I would say as a language game. I mean, language game with the power structure behind it, of course. Meaningless. I mean, just and by the way, if it's very interesting. In his last volume, it's called Sociology of Freedom. Abdullah Öcalan. I mean, I would say it's very easy to say he is Islamophobic than anti-Semitic. I mean, a lot of sweeping essentialization of Islam and using the say Islam did this, Islam did that. But so the question, no one go and say Öcalan is Islamophobic. But I mean, there is sufficiently critical mass of those who write that he is anti-Semitic. So this is what is really alarming today, and more and more the beautiful idea of a safe space, if you like, in our in the class in the university, how it has been transformed, but by what I called symbolic liberals. So it's not about the right wing, but also about some left, cultural left, that it become also it's less and less tolerant toward, if you like, a criticism, and this reflects more and more polarization within society. So just I want to say that new anti-Semitism, like new laïcité in France, it's a complete transformation of what is really a beautiful idea of secularism. What is the idea that really we should not be anti-Semitic, and how it just throw it to become a very, if you like, something very idealist. I mean, it's nothing on materiality. I mean, just I will finish by quoting an article of Anna Code. She is a moral and political philosopher, American one. She is now president of the university. She has an article commenting on the encampment, Palestinian encampment, and you cannot believe a philosopher I mean, outstanding. I mean, apparently she has a good career. How she talk, how a Jew in American university can suffer from some slogan without any alluding to what is going on Gaza. I mean, it's amazing how suddenly, I mean, the decontextualized language. I mean, how free Palestine become it's inherently anti-Semitic in a context of a genocide. So this is, if you like. Now maybe to open the floor. Okay. So please. Can you, please, we are filming it, so you need to be in the microphone. Do we have a, we don't have a microphone, so please, can you come to a microphone, please? Yeah. No, because we are filming it. Okay. So, yeah, okay. We will collect, okay, 2-3 rounds. Yeah, okay, please. Can you present yourself? Yeah.
Yes, my name is Masa Mufti. I'm an education scholar, and thank you so much for this brilliant presentation and so inspiring. The two ideas that came to my mind while you're drawing this history of deconstructing anti-Semitism, leading to the point of, justifying even Zionism, using the notion of anti-Semitism. There's just two things that came to my mind, and I didn't kind of, sense them or. The idea that actually anti-Semitism is restricted to the Jewish identity. We all live in a Semite region, and we still struggle with, when somebody accuses us of being anti-Semite, while we think that, how can, this is so paradoxical. I am actually a Semite, and yet I have to defend myself from me. So how come this didn't appear in the course of the deconstruction? Because as if, the entire Jewish question, as you said, is restricted, or anti-Semitism is restricted to the Jewish question. The second point was the idea we still hear today a lot is about, you mentioned the religious connotation of the beginning of anti-Semitism, but I would say the holiness, because it always refers to the chosen people. And there is something that we cannot kind of attack, or it's like, attacking, that's completely unholy. And there's this aspect or dimension of deconstruction as well. How do we address the holiness when it comes to the chosen people? Thank you.
Thank you, Masa. So, Abu Michael, I don't know.
Well, my name is Ernst Heider. I am retired from teaching at AUB, so I was just coming here for interest. So we talk about the Jews, but who are the Jews? And I'm asking this question because there is some recent studies based on DNA that suggest actually Palestinians have more sort of blood of the Hebrews than the European Jews.
Mm-hmm. So here.
Thank you very much, Doctor, because such an intriguing subject, especially in our area. I want just to ask you if you are well aware of the Arab thinkers, how they dealt with this issue. We have certain thinkers who have taken this, the question of the Jewish question, coming to know first that it is a European issue. It's not at all, never in the Arab world we had this issue of who is Jewish, who is not, because we used to think that they are Arabs but with the Jewish religion. So we never had this issue. Okay. Under the Ottoman we had this milal والهيدا. But second, it's a historical issue. Third, it's a religious issue, especially that the Christians blame the Jews that they had crucified Jesus. So, it's a multifaceted problem that is being treated from one side by the Zionists, okay? So, how we saw this, نحن, the Palestinians, how they saw this issue, how we, and there are two books that I would like to highlight other than Edward Said, the Palestinian question, which I have not read already, but I'm planning to. First, you have this Jamal Hamdan, Dr. Jamal Hamdan, who's an Egyptian anthropologist. He wrote studying Jews anthropologically. And he defined, Jews mostly live in cities, not in the countryside. And they are, because they were minorities and they were always, they had this burden on them, they were a very learned group. They saw, like us Palestinians, studying and learning is the way out for emancipation. Okay? So it's very interesting. It's a small booklet by Kitab al-Hilal. It's in Arabic. I don't know if you can find it. The other book that I would advise that you read, I don't know if it's in English, it's Ghassan Kanafani on Zionist literature. Zionist, not Jewish. انتبهي. Look, I'm against putting it as a Jewish issue. There is a Jewish issue in Europe, but how it developed into Zionist, and here is the main contradiction in Zionism, because religion is not a nationality.
Oh, okay, clear to her. Okay. The red, so please use the microphone.
Okay, my name is Malkon. I'm a Palestinian from Palestine. I'm a human rights specialist. And there's two quick points. I noticed you said something about equality wouldn't solve anti-Semitism. If you may kindly elaborate.
Sorry, could you repeat?
Equality, you said it doesn't solve anti-Semitism when they looked at it before. Okay. If you may elaborate why they looked at it like it doesn't bring about emancipation. And by the way, sorry that I didn't say thank you, Professor Arlene. It was amazing. And I had another point. Okay, I forgot. If I remember, I will say it.
Yeah. So, last question in this round, please. You. Yeah. Yes, I remember.
Sorry, because I remember. I just wanted to say that this whole Jewish question in the academic discourse, is it out there because it's the oppressor's psychology that we're trying to analyze and study to understand why oppression, genocide, etc. happens? Or why is there a whole discourse continuously on the Jewish identity question, etc., where the Palestinians were continuously massacred? I'm not saying there's nothing on the Palestinians, but also to hear this out. Thank you. Sorry.
Hi. What is fascinating in the story of Zionism and Judaism, etc., is, I'll give an example. Let's assume we have two brothers who are Jews, okay, born Jews. One of them converts to Christianity, and the other one remains a Jew. So the Jew has the right to a nation, which is called Israel, whereas the guy who changed and became Christian, he loses his identity and everything. This is crazy. I mean, the mixture between nationalism and religion, why is it so particular to those people, the Zionists? And why is the West, the whole West, so much dedicated to imposing something which is unnatural, unlogical, and that's basically it. If they were persecuted under, I don't want to say, I'd like to say Catholic countries, why should people in the Muslim world suffer? Especially when they were being kicked out of Europe. They were received with big arms by the Ottoman Empire. They even settled them in Istanbul, for example. Those who were kicked out when the Spanish War, you know. And it's fascinating that the people who helped the Jews became their victims, and we find it normal all over Europe and the West especially. I'm sure the East is the same thing, but I find it very, very fascinating to build. This is the only country in the whole globe that is based on a religion, whereas the other countries are based on nationalism, on the fact that people live together in a certain border, except for Israel. Thank you.
Clear. You have the floor.
Okay. Well, thank you for those great questions and contributions and book indications and everything. Well, I'll begin from the end. Of course, they shouldn't. It's very straightforward. They shouldn't. It's absolutely wrong, and it's absolutely related exactly to European power. No? They have the power to transfer their problem onto another people. No? In fact, what I wanted to say, and I wasn't able to at the beginning, and now you give me the opportunity, is that actually when I say the Jewish question, I mean the question of Europe. It's not the Jewish question. It's the question of Europe being able to deal with its own society, with its own problems, with its own racism, persecution, and so forth. So that's, I think, the best understanding. And actually, it's not, we understand why several people, not least Lebanese Elias Khoury, defined the real new anti-Semitism as Islamophobia. The new anti-Semitism is not the IHRA definition. It's Islamophobia. The Muslims today, and also Arab non-Muslims, but mainly the Muslim immigration in Europe, they're being stigmatized, viewed exactly as the Jews were before. I mean, how about these conspirational theories of the mosques connecting to each other and overcoming and transforming the European culture, the French nation. I mean, the Muslims in France are 8% of the population, and whenever there's a poll in the streets, people say that the Muslims are, or the Arabs, they say, are 30%, 40%. The people have the wrong idea, because in fact they augment it's the whole Islamophobic, it's the fear of their culture being transformed by a penetration of Arabs into Europe. Arabs/Muslims seen as the whole same thing, right? And in fact, this was the kind of conspirational theory that we had in pre-World War II Europe. Now, the idea that the Jews were penetrating and transforming and overcoming, and conspirations for, actually Hitler, in the same sentence, in the same speech, practically the same sentence, he would say that the Jews were responsible for capitalism and for the Russian Revolution, communism. In the same speech. Completely contradictory, but that's anti-Semitism as Islamophobia. They have the same roots, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. No, so I really like to think that that's exactly what it is. So I agree with your indignation. You're supposed to be. We have to be indignated with this treatment of the issue, and also with the term. Of course, the term is wrong. Anti-Semitism. There's a distinction that is useful between anti-Judaism, which was a different modality of persecution based on the idea of a religious group, which was typical to feudal times, and the racist called anti-Semitism, right? The term anti-Semitism, it was born at the end of the 19th century only. And it is used to designate a racist. And actually, what I think is most important is to highlight what you said, and to highlight the fact that the hatred against Jews was also against Arabs, Muslims, even in pre-World War II Europe, and in the Nazi concentration camps, those Jews who were Jews and others, because of course not only Jews, right, that were in really bad conditions. They were like terminal, and they couldn't even keep themselves standing up straight. They were called Muslims. Yeah, so in fact, it's not anti-Semitism. Had there been more and a tradition of Islamophobia and anti-Arab racism in Europe, it would have been directed against all of them. And then you would say, okay, now the term is a little bit more appropriate. The term, of course, is never appropriate, even because the whole idea of a Semitic is actually something, cultural definition that can be discussed. So terms are always difficult. They are always frustrating, and they encapsulate, and they are never perfect. But I totally agree with you. One of the points to be developed is the critique of the term itself, and where this can lead us to, for sure. For sure, it has many ramifications. Coming back then, as contributions and questions were made. Yeah, and so coming back to this idea of who is then the Jew, right? Well, Shlomo Sand has developed that idea very well, right, in his book. The idea that, in fact, if DNA tests were allowed in Israel, which they are not, exactly because they would prove that there's no such thing as the return of the chosen people, and there's the whole problem of chosen. If they were allowed, probably you would show that, because in fact, this is something that Abraham Leon also argues in his book, that the dispersion of the Jews, first, it was never complete. The peasant stays. And then the idea is that the Palestinians were the descendants of those peasants. Now which Jews or Hebrews were dispersed when of the Neo-Babylonian exile or the Roman invasion? The elites. Never the people, the peasants, and they stayed on. So in fact, it's completely true. There's no such thing as a return 2,000 years afterwards, and it's not even up to me to say there are other more prominent moments in history in which Europe ignored this argument, such as in the Paris peace talks. The argument was there. The argument was put and it was completely ignored. There were more than one report saying that this was hilarious, it was ridiculous, it was unfounded, the idea of a justified return 2,000 years afterwards. But the whole narrative that was so useful for Europe to use for its own colonial and domination purposes, of course. So Shlomo Sand develops that idea very well. He's not the first one, but he develops it very well in his book, The Invention of the Jews. Then, I'll go back to the beginning then so that I don't lose track of everything. This is what I wanted to say, yes. It's when you were speaking of the PKK leader and how he is described as an anti-Semite for some of the things he wrote, and in fact what he was saying down in deep was not against the Jews. It's and how language can be so concealing of the truth. It can really take us to understand situations completely wrong, and in fact, in fact, what we have today is a whole understanding of what is happening in the region, which doesn't really point to solutions, even when you try to dissociate the Palestinian question from other. Again, the Palestinian question, which is actually the question of colonialism, not of Palestine, but from other issues, for example, the Kurd issue, or other nationalism, other struggles. Only 30, 40, 50 years ago, there was a tendency to see the whole region, I think, more as a whole, and as interrelations between those struggles. And now everyone tries to find a solution for Palestine inside what are called those frontiers, as if it were possible to solve anything inside the situation in which we are now, and inside those frontiers built by the British Mandate. and dissociating Palestine from its neighbors, no? Where the relations are so intense and close. And of course, then that's why you find the Egyptian intellectual with answers to all these questions, because he's directly affected by it, no? Because he's directly affected to what is happening to Palestine and how the Jewish issue and how the issue of persecution of the Jews, called antisemitism, has affected the lives of millions of people here, no? How it has been conducted into a region that has never known the persecution. As I was saying before, up to the 12th century, the majority of the Jews of the world were in this part of the region, and they were Arabs, yeah, and they were not persecuted. You will not find a single register in history of persecution of Jews for being Jews. You can have problems.
Can we have a second round?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And this transferal then, through colonialism, this transferal then of the issue of Europe into this region in a way to colonize, divide, and create unresolving problems can only be dealt with, and from my point of view, through the whole region. No?
So we take the last round?
Yes.
Yeah. We'll start by Ali Al-Atasi. Please, can you come here?
Yes, that's true. I'm trying to look here and remember everything. What is it that you wanted to get an answer to that I didn't answer? Yes.
And asked about the equality versus emancipation, antisemitism, and
Yeah, specifically the idea developed by Marx, right? The idea developed by Marx, in which he said that political emancipation was limited. And he set the grounds, although he did not develop this in his essay, for understanding that political emancipation would not bring about the possibility, other authors did, developed this at the time, but would not bring about the idea, the possibility of the end of the persecution of the Jews. Because you have a preservation of a system that depends on the existence of the differences and of the instrumentalizations in certain moments of crisis of these differences.
even with equality being instated?
Because this equality is not a real equality among people, and more than that, you have a separation between the state, the ideal equality of the state, and civil society, which is where real life happens, the individual life, and the tendency of this individual person in civil society view his role in the state as if it were his real self. It's not. He's separated. There's separation. There's alienation, and inequality, and and systems of domination through the state are part of the reason why the state was created in the first place. The state depends on differences to be able to act in name of the implementation of its own reasons. So this is the basis for racism to exist, for persecution to exist, for one social class. Of course, Marx hadn't even developed the idea of the bourgeoisie and the working class yet, okay? But later on, he would also show that this was the political state is the state developed by the bourgeoisie. This is something that he's already developing here. And in order to ascend as a social class and dominate others, and racism is part of the articulations of these relations between groups in society. Okay.
Sorry,
just because you are in Beirut, the Arab world, I want just to put the attention that I know that the anti-Semitism don't belong to our tradition, but still, from the beginning of the 20th century until today, a lot of literature related to the anti-Semitism was translated to Arabic, adapted by a lot of political party and political movement and political intellectual field, etc.
And today it exists in our society. And I don't like that we say, no, we know we are Semitic. Sorry, also the Semitism, the question of race, it's belongs to the 19th century, as you say, but also I don't feel myself, I want to give the definition of myself as a Semite because it belongs to the 19th century, is Ernest Renan, etc. It's a racist. And I don't think that saying that I am Semite, that I am not anti-Semitism. No, the anti-Semitism is related to the Jew, and we have a lot of party and political leaders, etc., who have a really very harsh anti-Semite discourse. You refer to Elias Khoury, our friend Elias Khoury. He is between the few minority who try to also speak about the Holocaust, about the anti-Semitism, and he was heavily criticized here in his own country when he tried to organize a conference about the Arab Jewish, when he tried to invite some Arab Jewish here. He was not allowed because some political party who didn't like to receive these people here. I want just, because I arrived a little bit late, I don't know at the beginning of your intervention if you mentioned, or because I want to hear your opinion, because I read recently the book of The End of the Jewish Modernity from Enzo Traverso, and he insists a lot about how after the Holocaust, but mainly after the Eichmann trial, how the Holocaust become a kind of civil religion in Europe, take a lot of place, and he's very critical about that. And I wonder how we can put that with your lecture about Marxism and Judaism. Thank you.
About the first point, by the way, Gilbert Ash'ar, he wrote an amazing book. Ghassan Haj, please. Yeah. Can you use a microphone, please? Yeah.
I just would like you to fantasize a bit and ask, how would you think Marx would write the Jewish question today?
Last question. Yeah, please.
Should I use a microphone?
Yeah, you need microphone, yeah. And among students, please, I mean, we are always taking the voice of students.
Hi, do you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question concerning your discussion on a new definition of anti-Semitism and how it uses fictitiously the idea of collective Jewishness and relates it to the state of Israel. I want to inquire whether it's possible in your account of such identities, using such identities like collective Jewishness, which might be very restrictive and heavily relying on identity politics, without actually having a certain neo-Nazi flirtations and limitations. Because, again, in this Marxist account, the idea of a collective restricted to an identity suffers from its limitations, and I'm skeptical on how Marxist can it be. So, thank you.
You have the floor.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Enzo Traverso is really a very important author, no? And The End of Jewish Modernity. Yeah, well, Enzo Traverso, his basic idea is that, and I was very happy that he wrote endorsement to my book. So that made me very pleased, of course. I admire him so much. The basic idea is that the Jews historically, and in the several countries in which they were mostly concentrated, because they were struggling against oppression for different forms of emancipation in Europe before even developing the idea of Zionism, and because they were in a position of oppression and with several laws against them in Eastern Europe, in the Tsarist Empire, for example, they couldn't have land, they couldn't possess land, they couldn't, they a whole bunch of restrictions. There was a whole tendency to deposit so much of their efforts and hopes into education, really leading them to be part of the intelligentsia in so many countries. So this Jewish modernity was really the idea of the development of all these forms of trying to overcome oppression, segregation that were applied against Jews in Europe. You know, there's a Brazilian, very, very interesting journalist. She came to Palestine, to Lebanon, Helena Salin. She died already quite some time ago, and she wrote a book called The Palestinian, the New Jew. Now, this idea is not new. It's not only hers, but I remember this now that you were saying this about Enzo Traverso, because the idea that Enzo Traverso develops there is that with the Holocaust and the birth of Israel, intellectual, progressive Jewish thinking came to an end. What Israel promoted were the think tanks, were the state intellectuals. You cannot be a state intellectual. It's impossible. So now, more recently, with what is happening today and the tendency today of the encampments in the universities and the Jewish young tendency to question this hold that Zionism has of the communities around the world, of the Jews around the world, these young, mainly young Jews, they are breaking with this. They are breaking with this hold. They are trying, and they are to a very large extent, depending on where you are, more in the United States, a bit in Brazil. We have groups, we have examples, we have people who are Jewish people who want to live their Judaism in a different way and not controlled by Zionism and controlled by the main discourse. And this, of course, is what Enzo Traverso more recently has seen with an optimist view, and even going back and relativizing a bit his idea of the end of Jewish modernity. It could be possible that we are seeing maybe a new, let's say, development of still forms of Jewish modernity nowadays. Okay, so he questions a bit. He goes back to this more recently and says, "Oh, it's not absolute. It's not total. Everything has its nuances and possibilities and so forth." And for example, his book. I think in his book, History After Gaza, or the what's it called in English? It's the Yes, exactly. He does develop that a bit there. He says he goes into a bit of that. And that's a very, very interesting, how would Marx write the Jewish question today, well, would he apply his historical materialism? For sure, no? He did that his whole life, to apply historical materialism to the analysis of the development of capitalism, to society, etc., and so forth.
It makes sense more today than in that time, I would say.
Yes.
Political emancipation is not sufficient.
No, political emancipation is not enough. No. There's another critique that is made against Marx, is that but he didn't do this so much. Engels did it more than Marx, believed in the assimilation of the Jews, that the Jews would assimilate. I don't believe that was what Marx was saying. I actually think that Marx was saying the opposite of that. He did not see assimilation as what would happen to the Jews, but other Marxists did. And they were wrong, of course. Actually, even Trotsky writes that. He says in 1903, Trotsky wrote an essay in which he said that he was completely wrong. He said that Zionism would disappear. He said, Zionism is this huge group of people who think a whole bunch of different things. It's impossible for this to continue existing. They're going to implode. And he, of course, was wrong. And later, he says that he was wrong in also believing that the tendency pointed towards assimilation of the Jews. But also Zionism was created to counter assimilation. Now, it was not only to counter anti-Semitism or the persecution of Jews, but also to counter assimilation. So the ways in which Marx and Marxists analyzed the Jews, Jewish history, the Jewish question, of course, they changed according to the period. Even if you use the same method, which I'm sure Marx would, he would have to adapt his view to what is happening today, for sure. I mean, that's the first thing about any analysis. If you want to be a serious analyzer, you have to adapt to the current reality. You have to be able to understand and to decipher the current realities, no? And today you have the issue of the Jewish state not being even a modern state. It's an ethnic state. It's the antithesis of a modern state, right? And this is defended by Europe, going back to something that was said here, defended by Europe as legitimate, as democracy, exactly.
I was just thinking that obviously, first of all, there would be some interesting differences in the class composition of Jewish people in Europe.
Class composition?
Of Jewish people in Europe.
Well,
and so empirically, he would be dealing with different Jewish composition. But also, there's a question of how do you bring in the colonial and the religious.
In fact, the class composition or the class specialization of the Jewish people ended with the beginning of capitalism. This is another thing that people also don't understand when they read the essay, that they think that Marx said that the Jews were responsible for capitalism. No, he said just the opposite. They were expelled when capitalism began. No? So with the rise of capitalism, there's no more Jewish class. No? It ends, it finishes.
There's more people class.
There's no more people class with the rise of capitalism. It ends. No? And this is something Abraham Leon.
It comes with the Jewish sect. It comes with the Jewish sect.
In order to fantasize how Marx would say, maybe we have you read Ilan Halevi, the book La Question Juive? Ilan Halevi is a very interesting. He's a Palestinian Jew. I mean, he was in a high rank in PLO, and he lived in Israel. So Ilan, he wrote his book, The Jewish Question, in 1982, and for him, for instance, what highlight in that time that you don't understand the Jewish question outside of the European racism, and it's a continuation of how they dealt with colonial with the colonies. I mean, that Israel is dealing with the Palestinian now. I mean, it's a very interesting, as Ghassan said, I mean, the centrality of thinking, if you like, how Zionism is related to classical idea of colonialism.
Yes,
yeah, so.
Yes. And another author that also helps to think that a lot is Daniel Ben Said, who was, from in France, but also analyzing the Jews and the Jews. He was a philosopher, but also very important in that kind of discussion. But yes, Ilan Halevi was amazing. No, it's very good to go back to him always. And then the question there, I'm sorry, but I didn't get your question. Could you repeat?
In your analysis and description of the new definition of anti-Semitism, you mentioned that the idea of a collective Jewishness is fictitiously used for the support of the state of Israel. I was telling you, is there any other way to use the idea of a collective restricted to a certain identity other than that way? So basically, you said in your discussion that the problem of Zionism is basically that what they do. Is it just that, or because of its very nature? So no. I was...
Listen, the whole idea of the collective Jew is a way for the hasbara, for the manipulation of the Jews to happen around the world, to relate the individual Jew to this supposed collective Jew. There is no collective Jew. No? In fact, what this movement today is doing in face of the genocide is to say, not in our name, no, we don't have anything to do with this, and we do not want to be seen as a collective Jew related to the state of Israel and represented by the state of Israel. So this is the very important movement, which is not easy because then they are struggling with their families, they're struggling with their traditions, they're having, inside, it's a very deep thing. But in face of genocide, it's what has to happen, no? So it's like the only segment of this arena that we're talking about today in which is actually responding to the gravity of the situation. No? You can expect nothing less than them. And in fact, we should ask, why aren't all the Jews doing this, no? Reviewing.
Unfortunately, we go beyond 6:30. She will take question after.
So this, to me, is really the beginning of a conversation which has been very, very interesting because, as I told you, for the last 25 years, I haven't wanted to go back to this, no? And I have been working with the question, again, the name of Palestine and Palestinian history, because I really believe that we shouldn't be holding on to issues of the past, and we have to look ahead, and we have to answer the issues of today. But I really felt, and I hope this has helped, that looking into these questions, articulations, arguments, language, help and to deconstruct them, understand where they come from and how they are manipulated to try to encapsulate the way we act in the world. I thought it was useful for me. I hope in some way it has been useful also. Yeah.
Arlene, Elizabeth, Clemesha, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Please get.
This book belongs to Pablo, but you can take a look.
So thank you so much for this amazing talk, and hopefully to see you in other events of CAMES. The next one will be in 16 October. Actually, it's about Victor Hugo and Islam. It's a talk organized by University of Maqasid in collaboration with us, CAMES. So hopefully to see you all. Thank you again, Arlene.
Thank you very much, Sari.